What would you do if a bleeding mafia boss hijacked your terrible blind date to hide from rival hitmen? You'd probably scream. But Genevieve didn't. Instead, she reached into her Hermes bag, pulled out the exact custom weapon stolen from his syndicate yesterday, and calmly handed it back. Listen closely. The evening at Le Bernardin, Manhattan's crown jewel of French seafood, was costing Richard Belmont approximately $800. Genevieve Caldwell knew this because Richard had subtly mentioned the price of the tasting menu 3 times before the second course even arrived. He was a quintessential finance bro, slicked back hair, a Rolex submariner that he kept flashing under the warm, ambient lighting, and an endless monologue about his offshore crypto portfolios and his recent real estate acquisitions in the Hamptons. Genevieve took a slow, measured sip of the Camus Special Selection 2018 Cabernet Sauvignon, letting the rich, dark fruit notes wash over her tongue while her mind drifted entirely away from Richard's grating voice. On paper, Genevieve was a senior appraiser at Cromwell, and Hayes a discreet boutique auction house on the Upper East Side that dealt in rare antiquities. In reality, her clientele was far darker than museum curators. She appraised, authenticated, and quietly fenced high-value off-the-books assets for New York's most dangerous underworld figures. She knew the difference between a blood diamond and a clean one. She knew the going street rate for a stolen Renaissance painting, and most importantly, she knew how to keep her mouth shut. Tonight, however, she was just trying to survive a blind date set up by her well-meaning but oblivious sister. So I told the contractor, if the marble isn't imported directly from Carrara, I'm pulling the funding. Richard scoffed aggressively, slicing into his seared tuna. You have to show these people who holds the leash. You know, Jen. It's Genevieve, she corrected softly, her tone perfectly even. Before Richard could launch into another tirade about supply chain logistics, the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. It wasn't a loud disruption. Places like Le Bernardin didn't allow for loud disruptions, but rather a sudden, sharp drop in the ambient noise. The maitre d' by the front entrance took a sudden nervous step backward. Genevieve's highly trained eyes flicked toward the foyer. 3 men had just walked in. They weren't dressed for a Michelin star dinner. They wore dark, heavy trench coats despite the mild October weather, and their eyes scanned the dining room with predatory intensity. Genevieve instantly recognized the tattoos peeking out from the collar of the lead man, the jagged crown of the Calabrese faction, a ruthless Brooklyn crime syndicate known for their brazen public hits. Her pulse ticked up a fraction of a beat, but she didn't panic. She kept her posture relaxed, her hands elegantly folded on the crisp white tablecloth. Who are they looking for? Suddenly a shadow fell over their booth. Before Richard could even look up from his tuna, a man slid into the semicircular leather booth directly beside Genevieve. He moved with a lethal fluid grace, boxing her in against the wall. The heavy scent of Tom Ford ombre leather washed over her, sharply undercut by the distinct metallic tang of fresh blood. Genevieve turned her head. Sitting inches from her was Gabriel Dante. The undisputed head of the Dante family syndicate. Gabriel was a ghost in the tabloids, but a legend in Genevieve's hidden world. He was breathlessly handsome, with sharp, aristocratic features, dark hair swept back flawlessly, and eyes as cold and grey as a winter storm. He was wearing a bespoke midnight blue Brioni suit, but Genevieve's sharp eyes immediately caught the dark, wet stain spreading across his lower left ribcage. He was bleeding, and he was cornered. Gabriel didn't miss a beat. He threw a heavy, muscular arm casually over the back of the booth, his hand resting dangerously close to Genevieve's shoulders, and flashed a brilliant, devastating smile at a completely bewildered Richard. "Jen, darling, I am so incredibly sorry I'm late," Gabriel said, his voice a rich, smooth baritone that commanded the space instantly. The traffic on the FDR was an absolute nightmare. I see you started without me. Richard blinked his fork, hovering in midair. Excuse me, who the hell are you? Gabriel's grey eyes locked onto Richard, the smile never leaving his face, though the sheer suffocating menace behind his gaze made Richard physically flinch. I'm an old friend, the kind of friend who doesn't mind sharing a booth. You don't mind, do you, buddy? Richard puffed up his chest, his ego warring with his deeply ingrained cowardice. Actually, I do mind. This is a private table. We're on a date. I'm going to have to ask you to leave before I call the manager. Underneath the table, out of Richard's line of sight, Genevieve felt Gabriel's left hand press hard against his ribs. The man was in agonizing pain, running on pure adrenaline. He had slipped in through the kitchen or a side door, desperately trying to blend into the crowd to evade the Calabrese hitmen who were currently terrorizing the front of house. Richard, isn't it? Gabriel purred, leaning forward slightly. The movement caused his jacket to fall open, just a fraction. Genevieve's eyes darted down. She saw the custom leather shoulder holster strapped across Gabriel's chest. It was entirely empty. The boss of the most feared syndicate on the East Coast had walked into a restaurant filled with rival assassins, and he didn't have his weapon. Yes, it's Richard. The finance bro snapped, oblivious to the lethal tension radiating from the man sitting across from him. And I don't know what kind of scam you're running, pal, but you've got 10 seconds to get out of my booth. Genevieve kept her expression entirely blank, but her mind was racing at 1,000 miles an hour. Through the elegant glass partitions of the dining room, she could see the 3 Calabrese men splitting up. They were moving methodically through the aisles, peering into the faces of the wealthy patrons, ignoring the frantic whispers of the waitstaff. They were hunting him, and they were only about 30 feet away. "Richard," Genevieve said, her voice dropping into a register of icy, absolute authority that made both men pause. "Shut up and eat your tuna." Richard's mouth snapped shut in sheer shock. He stared at her, as if she had grown a second head. Gabriel Dante, however, slowly turned his head to look at Genevieve. Up close, his eyes were mesmerizing, filled with a violent, hyper-aware intelligence. He had hijacked her table expecting a hysterical civilian. He expected her to scream or cry or blow his cover. Instead, he found a woman looking back at him with the cool, detached calculation of a chess grandmaster. "They're blocking the front exit," Genevieve murmured softly, her lips barely moving so Richard couldn't hear over the clatter of silverware. "And the kitchen staff just locked the swinging doors. You have nowhere to run." Gabriel's jaw tightened. "Just smile and pretend you're entirely captivated by me, sweetheart. They're looking for a lone wolf, not a man on a double date." "They aren't stupid," she replied, picking up her wine glass and taking another delicate sip. "They're checking every face. They'll be at this table in exactly 45 seconds. Gabriel leaned in closer, his lips brushing the shell of her ear to maintain the illusion of an intimate conversation. The heat of his body was palpable. "Then it's a good thing I'm a fast talker." "You're bleeding through your brioni," she whispered back, "and your holster is empty. You can't talk your way out of 3 armed men, Mr. Dante." Gabriel froze. The absolute stillness of his body was far more terrifying than any sudden movement. His eyes widened imperceptibly. He hadn't introduced himself. He hadn't shown her his holster. Yet this stunning, elegant woman in a tailored emerald silk dress not only knew exactly who he was, but she had also completely assessed his tactical disadvantage in a matter of seconds. "Who the hell are you?" Gabriel demanded quietly, his voice dropping an octave, dangerous and low. "Someone who hates having her dinner interrupted," Genevieve replied smoothly. 40 feet away, the lead Calabrese hitman roughly shoved a waiter aside his hand, dipping inside his trench coat. They were getting closer. Genevieve calmly reached down with her left hand, brushing against the smooth, luxurious calfskin of her Hermes Birkin, 30 in noir Togo leather, resting on the plush bench beside her. Unsnapping the signature sangles, she slipped her hand into the dark interior of the bag. Earlier that afternoon, a very nervous, low-level thief had walked into the private back room of Cromwell and Hayes. He had placed a velvet-wrapped bundle on her desk, claiming he had found it and wanted a quick payout. When Genevieve unwrapped it, she nearly stopped breathing. It was a masterpiece of lethal engineering. A Cabot Guns 1911, forged from pure Damascus steel, featuring grips carved from ancient meteorite. It was a one-of-a-kind piece, valued at over $50,000. But more importantly, she recognized the subtle custom engraving on the slide, a small, stylized, roaring lion, the crest of the Dante Syndicate. The idiot thief had stolen Gabriel Dante's personal sidearm. Genevieve had immediately locked the doors, bought the weapon from the terrified thief for a fraction of its worth, and planned to use it as leverage to broker a highly lucrative favor from the Dante family. She had carried it in her Birkin bag to the dinner, intending to lock it in her private safe, back at her apartment. Fate, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. Underneath the heavy linen tablecloth, Genevieve grasped the cold, textured grip of the heavy pistol. She made sure the safety was firmly engaged, then slid it smoothly across the leather seat toward Gabriel's left thigh. Gabriel flinched as something heavy and metallic pressed against his leg. "Take it," Genevieve whispered softly. Frowning, Gabriel dropped his hand under the table. His long, calloused fingers brushed against the cold steel. The moment his hands wrapped around the grips, he recognized the unique balance and weight of the weapon. His breath hitched in his throat. It was impossible. His personal Cabot 1911 had been lifted from his private suite at the Plaza Hotel 36 hours ago. It was a staggering breach of security that had sent his entire organization into a violent frenzy. And now a random woman on a blind date had just handed it to him under a table at a Michelin-star restaurant. Gabriel's head snapped up, his storm-grey eyes locking on to Genevieve with a mixture of absolute shock and burning fascination. "Don't stare," she instructed calmly, smiling at him as if he had just told a delightful joke. "They're looking at us." The lead Calabrese hitman had stopped at the end of their aisle. His dead, dark eyes scanned the booth. He saw Richard sweating and looking entirely out of his depth. Then he looked at Gabriel. The hitman's eyes narrowed. He recognized the profile. The hitman took a step forward, his hand slipping deep into his coat, ready to draw. Under the table, Gabriel's thumb clicked the safety off. The microscopic snick was deafening in Genevieve's ears. Without breaking eye contact with the hitman, Gabriel subtly adjusted his posture. He didn't raise the weapon above the table. He simply shifted his jacket, revealing the thick Damascus steel barrel resting calmly on his thigh, pointed perfectly dead center at the assassin's abdomen. It was a silent standoff. The hitman froze. He looked at Gabriel's smiling, relaxed face. He looked down at the table where the unmistakable shape of a high-caliber weapon was pressing against the tablecloth. The assassin did the math. If he drew, he might get a shot off, but Gabriel Dante would tear him in half before he hit the ground. Slowly, agonizingly, the hitman withdrew his empty hand from his coat. He gave Gabriel a nearly imperceptible nod of submission, turned on his heel, and signaled his men to retreat. Within seconds, the three trenchcoats melted out the front doors of the restaurant, disappearing into the chaotic Manhattan night. The crushing tension in the dining room slowly evaporated. The maître d' rushed over to apologize to the patrons, claiming it was a misunderstanding with some aggressive paparazzi. Richard, entirely oblivious to the lethal shadow play that had just occurred in front of him, slammed his hand on the table. "That does it, I'm getting the manager," You are completely unhinged, pal." Gabriel didn't even look at Richard. His intense gaze was anchored entirely on Genevieve, sweeping over her elegant features, trying to solve the impossibly dangerous puzzle sitting next to him. He smoothly slipped the Cabot 1911 back into his shoulder holster, concealing it perfectly. "You're not a civilian," Gabriel stated quietly, his voice vibrating with a mixture of dark promise and deep intrigue. Genevieve finally looked at him, a cool, enigmatic smile playing on her lips. She reached for her wine glass. "I'm just a girl trying to enjoy a 2015 Camus Mr. Dante," she said softly. "Now, are you going to stay for dessert, or do I need to bill you for my services?" Richard's face had gone a remarkable shade of puce. He stood up, throwing his linen napkin onto the seared tuna. "I am calling the police," he stammered, pointing a trembling finger at Gabriel. "You're both insane. I'm leaving." Gabriel didn't even blink. He reached into the inner pocket of his ruined Brioni jacket, withdrew a thick platinum money clip, and tossed a crisp $100 bill onto the table. It landed perfectly on Richard's plate. "For your valet, Richard. Walk out the front door. Keep your eyes on the pavement and forget you ever sat here. If you dial 911, I will personally ensure your offshore crypto accounts are drained before you reach the sidewalk." The sheer freezing certainty in Gabriel's voice stripped away the last of Richard's bravado. The finance bro swallowed hard, grabbed his coat, and practically sprinted toward the coat check. Genevieve watched him go with a mild sigh. That was my ride back to the Upper East Side. "I think I can manage to arrange a car," Gabriel murmured. The adrenaline of the standoff was beginning to fade, and the reality of his gunshot wound was reasserting itself. He pressed his forearm against his ribs, his knuckles turning white. "But before we go anywhere, you and I are going to have a very honest conversation." "I prefer honesty," Genevieve replied, swirling the last of her Cabernet. "It saves so much time." Gabriel leaned across the table, invading her personal space. The scent of Tom Ford ombre leather was intoxicatingly close now. My custom Cabot 1911 was locked in a biometric safe inside my private suite at the Plaza Hotel. Only 3 people in the world have the clearance to even access that floor. Yesterday it vanished. No alarms, no forced entry. And tonight, a beautiful, unnamed woman on a terrible blind date hands it to me under a table while 3 Calabrese hitmen try to put me in the ground. Explain. Genevieve met his steely grey gaze without flinching. She could see the pain tightening the corners of his eyes, the slight shallowness of his breathing. He was dangerous, cornered and bleeding, which made him infinitely more lethal. "My name is Genevieve Caldwell," she said, her voice dropping to a low velvet whisper. "To the IRS, I am a senior appraiser at Cromwell and Hayes. To the people who actually run this city's underground economy, I am the woman you come to when you need to quietly liquidate assets that technically don't exist." Gabriel's eyes narrowed as recognition sparked in his mind. "The art dealer, that's what they call you on the street. You fenced the Romanov diamonds last spring." "I authenticate and I broker," she corrected smoothly. "This afternoon, a very sweaty, low-level street thief named Tommy walked into my back office. He had your gun wrapped in velvet. He wanted $20,000 for it. He didn't know what it was, but he knew it was expensive. I recognized your family crest on the slide. I bought it off him for $5,000, intending to keep it in my private safe." Gabriel let out a harsh, cynical laugh that ended in a sharp wince. "You bought my stolen weapon from a junkie." "I secured an asset," Genevieve countered, her eyes flashing. "An asset I planned to use to negotiate a favor from the Dante Syndicate. I didn't plan on delivering it to you in the middle of a seafood restaurant. But more importantly, Mr. Dante, you are missing the most critical piece of this puzzle. And what is that? Tommy the thief is an idiot, Genevieve said flatly. He couldn't hack a toaster, let alone the biometric security of the Plaza Hotel. He didn't steal your gun. He was handed your gun. Gabriel went entirely still. The implications crashed over him like a wave of ice water. Exactly, Genevieve whispered, leaning in so close her lips almost brushed his jaw. Someone in your inner circle bypassed your security, took your weapon, and gave it to a street kid to fence. Why? Because they wanted you unarmed tonight. The Calabrese hitmen didn't just stumble upon you here. They knew you were having dinner at Le Bernardin. They knew your security detail was compromised, and they knew your shoulder holster was empty. Gabriel's mind raced through the roster of his most trusted men. His capos, his lieutenants, his advisors. An inside job, the ultimate betrayal. You're bleeding through your shirt, Genevieve observed quietly, glancing down at the dark stain expanding across his ribs. And whoever set you up is going to realize those hitmen failed. You can't go to a hospital. You can't go to your usual safe houses because your mole knows where they are. Gabriel looked at her, really looked at her. Beneath the emerald silk dress and the elegant demeanor was a mind as sharp and tactical as a scalpel. She wasn't just calm, she was 10 steps ahead. You said you wanted a favor. Genevieve, Gabriel said, his voice a gravelly rumble. What is it? The Bratva is trying to muscle in on my territory, she said, her tone suddenly turning strictly business. A Russian lieutenant named Sergei is demanding a 30% cut of all my high-end appraisals. I want him permanently deterred. I want the Dante family's absolute protection over my operations. Gabriel smiled, a genuine, terrifying expression that showed exactly why he was the boss. If you get me out of here and help me find the rat in my house, Sergei won't just be deterred. He'll be a ghost. Deal, Genevieve said. She snapped her Hermes bag shut and stood up, her posture flawless. Now put your arm around my waist, smile for the cameras, and try not to bleed on my shoes. We're going to my private vault. The drive from Midtown Manhattan to Genevieve's secured off-the-books loft in Tribeca was a tense blur of neon streetlights and driving rain. They bypassed her residence, entirely opting instead for the reinforced industrial space she utilized strictly for storing sensitive merchandise. The second, the heavy steel deadbolts locked behind them, Gabriel's knees finally buckled. Genevieve caught him bearing the dense weight of his muscular frame. She guided the Mafia boss to a vintage leather Chesterfield sofa situated in the center of the cavernous room. The loft was a sprawling maze filled with climate-controlled crates of antiquities, Renaissance tapestries, and a formidable array of state-of-the-art surveillance equipment. Shirt off, she ordered, moving briskly toward a stainless steel medical cabinet. Operating as an underworld fence meant occasionally dealing with clients who arrived in less than perfect physical condition. Gabriel gritted his teeth, shedding the ruined midnight blue suit jacket and unbuttoning his soaked shirt. The bullet had grazed his left side, a deep groove along his ribs. It wasn't immediately fatal, but it was bleeding heavily. Genevieve returned holding sterile gloves, medical-grade antiseptic, and a suturing kit. She worked with the exact same detached precision she reserved for repairing a microscopic tear in an 18th-century canvas. Gabriel watched her intently as she cleaned the wound, fascinated by her absolute lack of panic. You have phenomenally steady hands, he noted quietly, his cold grey eyes fixed firmly on her face. Don't attempt to flirt with me while I have a needle inside your flesh, Mr. Dante, she replied smoothly. It's highly distracting. It's Gabriel, he corrected, and I wasn't flirting. I was making a factual observation regarding your tactical use to my organization." She tied off the final synthetic stitch, snipped the thread, and taped a gauze pad firmly over his ribs. "There, you'll live. Now we need to locate your mole before they realize you are still breathing." Genevieve walked over to a bank of encrypted monitors resting on a massive mahogany desk. Her fingers flew rapidly across the mechanical keyboard. "When the thief Tommy sold me the weapon, I pulled the security footage from the alley behind my office. Let's see who he was talking to." She pulled up a grainy feed on the center monitor. It showed the nervous thief pacing anxiously. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. Gabriel stepped up silently behind Genevieve, leaning over her shoulder. The heat radiating from his chest sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "Zoom in on his left hand," Gabriel commanded. Genevieve enhanced the digital image. As the mystery man handed over the cash, his expensive coat sleeve rode up, revealing a heavy gold watch featuring a bright sapphire dial. It was a custom Patek Philippe. Gabriel let out a slow, ragged breath. "Arthur." Genevieve looked up at him. "Arthur. Arthur Penhaligon, my chief financial advisor. He has been with my family since my father ran the syndicate." Gabriel's jaw clenched. "He's the only person besides me who had the override code for the Plaza Suite. He sold me out to the Calabrese." "Why?" Genevieve asked, analytical and cold. "Because the Calabrese faction is aggressively expanding into the seaports, and I flatly refuse to let them utilize my private docks," Gabriel stated, devoid of emotion. "Arthur cared infinitely more about profit margins than morals. With me dead tonight, Arthur flawlessly takes over the business operations as a puppet for the Calabrese." Genevieve's phone suddenly buzzed on the desk. She glanced down at the screen, her blood running cold. "Gabriel," she said slowly, "my perimeter alarms just tripped. Someone is currently coming up the freight elevator." Gabriel snatched his Cabot 1911 from the desk, racking the slide with a sharp clack. "Arthur tracked the GPS in my phone. I should have ditched the device." "He doesn't know you recovered the gun," Genevieve said, shifting into combat mode. She reached under her desk, pulling out a compact, fully suppressed Heckler & Koch MP7 submachine gun. Gabriel raised a dark eyebrow, an art appraiser who casually packs German military hardware. "I think I'm in love." "Focus, Gabriel," she snapped. "The elevator doors open directly into the main hallway. We have a distinct choke point." The heavy gears of the freight elevator shuddered to a harsh halt. The iron gates slammed open. Tactical footsteps immediately flooded the corridor. "Gabriel," a voice called out. It was Arthur playing the role of the deeply concerned lieutenant, flawlessly. "Gabriel, it's Arthur. We received a tip you were hit. Are you in here?" Gabriel gestured sharply for Genevieve to flank the left side, behind a stone statue of a Roman gladiator, while he took the right behind reinforced wooden crates. "I'm here, Arthur," Gabriel called back, feigning a dying man. "I'm hit bad. I'm bleeding out on the floor." Arthur stepped into the main room, flanked by 4 armed Calabrese enforcers carrying shotguns. Arthur was wearing the exact same trench coat from the surveillance footage, the gold Patek Philippe gleaming brightly. "Thank God," Arthur said, a triumphant smirk on his face. "Don't worry, Gabriel. I'll make absolutely sure the family is taken care of." "I know you will, Arthur," Gabriel said. Gabriel stepped out from behind the crates. He stood tall, the terrifying embodiment of underworld power, the custom Damascus steel. Cabot 1911 leveled directly at Arthur's chest. Arthur stared blankly at the weapon. "That's impossible. You didn't have that." "You shouldn't trust street thieves with family heirlooms," Gabriel said coldly. Before the Calabrese enforcers could react, Genevieve stepped smoothly out from the dark shadows on their left blind side. With brutal efficiency, she squeezed the trigger of the MP7. The suppressed weapon coughed rapid bursts. 3 hitmen dropped to the concrete floor instantly. The 4th hitman panicked, firing his shotgun wildly toward Genevieve. The buckshot shattered the stone statue next to her, showering her entirely in ancient dust, but she ducked perfectly in time. A single deafening roar echoed through the loft. Gabriel had fired the Cabot. The heavy .45 caliber round caught the last hitman in the chest, throwing him violently backward. The room fell dead silent, save for the ringing in their ears and the terrified breathing of Arthur Penhaligon. Arthur fell heavily to his knees, throwing his hands in the air. "Gabriel, please, the Calabrese. They threatened my family." Gabriel walked slowly across the floor, stopping mere inches from Arthur. "You sold my life for a percentage of the shipping docks, Arthur," Gabriel said quietly. "You handed my own gun to an enemy." "Gabriel, wait." Gabriel pulled the trigger. Arthur collapsed silently. Gabriel stood towering over the body for a long moment. He slowly lowered the weapon, turning to look at Genevieve. She was standing amidst the stone dust, her emerald dress ruined, looking absolutely breathtaking. He walked toward her, reaching out to gently brush a streak of stone dust from her pale cheek. "You saved my life tonight, Genevieve Caldwell." Gabriel murmured, his stormy eyes locking onto hers. "You saved mine just now," she replied softly. "I suppose that makes us completely even." "Not even close," Gabriel whispered, leaning in until his lips brushed against her ear. "Sergei won't ever bother your operations again. But I have a distinct feeling we are going to be doing a lot more business together." Genevieve smiled, a slow, dangerous expression. She adjusted the lapel of his ruined shirt. "I strictly deal in high-value assets, Mr. Dante." Gabriel chuckled a low, dark sound, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then it is a very good thing I plan on being your most prized possession." Did Genevieve make the right move, or is she playing a dangerous game she can't win by aligning with Gabriel Dante? Let us know what you think in the comments below. If you loved this thrilling mafia romance, hit that like button, share this story with your friends who love a good plot twist, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more intense, real-life drama stories every single week.